Thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here in this panel with you. It's a pleasure to present and talk about the state of scholarly practices in South Africa. So good to be here. I hope that what I share can be of benefit to you. In South Africa, we have a small but vibrant community of engineering education people. The South African Society for Engineering Education probably has about 100 participants at our biennial conference. So every 2 years we have our conference. And the way we could maybe sketch the landscape in South Africa currently is that we have every other year we have workshops through the South African Society for Engineering Education. And those are more what you might call the practical aspects of engineering education. You know, for example, workshops around educating engineers for the 21st century, things like sustainable development or peace engineering, so those sorts of themes. And they kind of focused more on teaching and learning and issues like assessment. And because the South African Society for Engineering Education, or SASE, is linked to our accreditation body, EXA, the Engineering Council of South Africa. There's also workshops around accreditation and those sorts of, those sorts of themes. So that's sort of on the one side, our workshops. Our conference happening every other year is a forum for, presentation of work, which is also sometimes more practical. So talking about teaching and learning. Maybe you could say it's not so scholarly in terms of it being sort of show and tell. That's how we can sort of characterize it. And maybe some data from student evaluations, for example. So there are those sorts of presentations. But more and more over the years, it's also been evolving towards more scholarly studies, studies that have a suitable framework or methodology or some sort of theoretical underpinning. And we are seeing that developing more and more, and there are more and more papers, with that sort of angle of more scholarly practices. And this year we launched our journal, the Southern Journal of Engineering Education, which is the official journal of SASE, but we have sort of positioned it as a global journal. And kind of see it as serving the global South. And that is more on the other side. So we have sort of the workshops on the one side and the conferences, which are kind of shifting towards the scholarly side. And we've positioned this journal as really a platform and a forum for scholarly research, valuing empirical investigations, but also papers on theoretical perspectives or methodological approaches and those sorts of things. And we will accept practice-oriented articles. If we have to talk around the kind of how things began, and Anne talked about legitimacy, and I think that's really important for engineering education research. And I think where we sort of started was actually in the 1990s with Duncan Fraser. You've heard Career was a recipient of the Duncan Fraser Award, so he was sort of started things going in South Africa, and he was in the same department, the Department of Chemical Engineering, with Jenny Case, and she started there in the 1990s also as an academic development officer. And Duncan Fraser was more kind of doing, I think where engineering education sort of started. He was kind of an enthusiastic professor that was enthusiastic about his teaching, and he wanted to just, talk around that and present about that, so it was quite kind of what we could call anecdotal research. But when Jenny Case came along, she had the freedom to explore in more detail what engineering education might look like in the South African context. And she actually went over to Australia, to Monash, and she did her PhD And I think she was between South Africa and Australia. And she did her PhD looking really at learning approaches to learning, which is very widely used theoretical framework in higher education studies. And so I think from the beginning through Jenny, we've had a really healthy link with higher education studies and also with education, because as you know, engineering education is very multidisciplinary. And I think the more that we can open ourselves up, to having cross-pollination from other, other areas in the humanities and elsewhere in sociology, I think it's going to make our research a lot healthier. And one of the things about engineering education, which I find so interesting, is that we're dealing a lot with, a lot of our colleagues were trained technically as engineers, and that education, I think, makes us think in a certain way. And when we want to talk about scholarly practice in engineering education, you have to kind of break out of that mold, of the way of thinking in that way, and you have to be able to, have other, a whole kind of change of mindset in terms of how we approach research and what is legitimate knowledge and those sorts of things. And I think from the beginning, Jenny was not trained. And I'm assuming you might know Jenny Case. So she is now at Virginia Tech, the director of the Department of Engineering Education there. She's quite well published. And she was actually my PhD supervisor. So she's very much seen as kind of the pioneer in South Africa. And Jenny was not trained in engineering, actually. She actually trained in science, and then she actually did her postgraduate diploma in education. And I think that was good for South Africa, because she had the ability to, to kind of bridge higher education studies and engineering education. And I think importantly, and I like the way that Anne started about is what's happening at the government level, because that sort of legitimacy at the high level, I think it translates into, allowing us to have a better scholarly approach kind of on the ground. And I think one of the things that what happened at the University of Cape Town was that Jenny was given the freedom as kind of an academic development officer. That was the title that she was given, to pursue what she felt she wanted to pursue, and to kind of have a kind of blue skies approach to research. And she was supervisor to a number of us as well. There's six other staff or faculty that were employed in similar kind of roles, where we did not have the pressure to pursue technical research, but we were encouraged to pursue engineering education research. And I think that was really important, because we all did our PhDs, using the sociology, or looking at sociology of knowledge, or drawing on, Cole Maton's work, Basil Bernstein, theories like that. So really nice, substantial theories. And I think that's when it gets really exciting, is when you start to branch out into these other areas and draw from there and bring that into engineering education. And so those are, those are kind of from the beginning. Something else that happened in the beginning, which I think was really important at the University of Cape Town, was the establishment of a Center for Engineering Education. And it was really just a small group of interested colleagues. And what they did was they studied that. One of the most important things, I think, was a reading group, where they chose a text and read weekly or every 2 weeks around methodologies, around theories, around research design. So they kind of really taught themselves, into engineering education research. And I think that's so important also, as I said, to kind of break out of the way of thinking as we kind of often think as engineers. I remember when I was doing my master's, there was someone from the Department of Anthropology who was kind of my supervisor. And she said, we're going to get the engineer out of you. We're going to send you on a course in anthropology. So I sort of did a master's course in anthropology. And I think the engineer certainly moved away from me. And I don't, I like to bridge the kind of gap between engineering and anthropology or sociology, those sorts of things.
So looking on to the next slide, of course, since 2018, we've had COVID-19, and it obviously had a